anyway, the way they made them in the old days, they had this little hook here, and it just beat it up so bad that this would wear out or this would break. And that's where I came up with, well, even before I got that one. See how it hits hard and comes back up? I figured if I use gears, it'll make the bump a lot less hard. Well, I'm originally from Tennessee, and I joined the Air Force right after high school, and I enjoyed the travel. I come out here in Arizona, and I really liked it, so I pretty well stayed. And it's a lot worse places than here, I'll tell you that. A toy like a teddy bear that she bought somewhere, and I decided to use the movements out of it to make that work. So I thought I'd make something of it, so I came up with this idea. That's the keepers of the garden. He gave me a fire pit that he was going to throw away, so I used the fire pit for the center, and I just kind of used my imagination for the pedals. So I put a bearing on the back of them and cut them up to where they're in even segments and weight them accordingly, and they just seem to spin all day long.
Go ahead.
Well, in Tucson, I lived there 30 years. I had a steel company, and I did a little bit of this stuff, probably 30, 40 years ago. But I was a working man, so I can't give up my work, so I didn't do much of it until I retired. And once I retired, I started doing it almost every day, just to keep me out of trouble, keep me out of the house. Really, that's true. Oh, in there. Yeah, it'll turn all the time.
Go ahead.
All right, this is a tailgate off of a 1968 Chevy that I tore apart and put part of it for the seat and part of it for the backing. And it came out real good. The grill I found up at White Elephant, and I used that, but it's out of a 68 GMC. But people don't seem to know that, so I don't tell them too much. All right, this is a horse that I built. I saw one over in New Mexico years ago, and I felt like I could build it. So when I retired, I tried it, and this is what ended up right here. It don't look too bad.
I was going to ask you, is where do these thoughts come from?
Well, now this one come off the internet.
Okay.
And you know, the tail, I was curious about that, but they say back in the day, years, millions, that he was a fish eater, and he used that tail for a rudder. You believe that?
Yep, I do. Through here, a big question I have is I'm trying to find kind of the essence of creativity. I see lots of things created here, but I wonder just how this man's mind works. When he wakes up in the morning, does he have a flash or a vision of something? Or does he just start working on something? He's got some parts out there put together, and it just kind of grows.
No, I know what you're saying. What you're thinking is, this guy needs to get a life.
No.
We found these chairs, this one in front of somebody's house, where they wanted to recycle, just give it to the trash men, and ran down there and grabbed them. And
now, I use gears back here. I don't know where I got them, somewhere, but they run a lot smoother than the old Whirlygigs that you see that hit real hard. So I try to use gears, and they last a long time. I get these heavier gears out of an old pasta maker. I buy a pasta maker for $10 or $12 and tear it apart just for the gears. But I can't find the steel ones, and if you could, you can't afford them. Steel bearings in just about everything you see turn around here, and they're sealed so they'll last forever. That's for the small stuff now. For the big stuff, I'll be using these right here, because I got some pieces out here that are pretty heavy, at least 100 pounds or more. Well, it's just a bunch of chickens pecking in the, I guess that's seed, I guess. And once the ground, this gets going real fast, it just goes too fast, and I have to turn this to stop the wind from hitting it.
They even painted little food on here for the birds. This makes them peck. Really cute.
Let's see, I'm here in Desert Homes 3, looking at all the fascinating metal sculptures and paintings, and you should come take a look sometime when you have a chance. It's a Desert
Just gotta
Homes.
get everybody over here to see this, don't we?
Yes, everyone come here because you're really missing something if you visit.
And it's free. Free to observe.
Any other stories to tell me?
Oh yeah, we got a bunch of them, but they'd just probably be lies. That is. But it
As we enter Rothenburg through the guide and tour gate, we walk through the picturesque town to the Museum of Crime and Punishment. If you were lucky enough, you would be brought to the magistrate's office, where you would be placed in a pillory. This was for minor offenses, and there were many. You could be a bad baker, a bad plumber, a bad musician, a bad candlestick maker, whatever your profession was. You would be shamed and punished by the townspeople. There were many excuses one could use to place a person in a dunk cage. Just claim it to the magistrate. During medieval times, Germany was a Christian region with strong ties to the Roman Catholic Church. Hearsay was often a cause for torture, along with unwed childbirth, homosexuality, and belief you were a witch. If that didn't bring a confession, well, maybe the hand iron would. Smashing their fingers or knees or bodies seemed like a logical way to bring a confession. Jingle bell shoes were used if you were convicted of being a thief. You would be bound to a pair of metal shoes with bells on them. That way, everyone would know when a thief was out and about in the town. Did you ever hear the phrase, "I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole"? 10-foot poles with neck clasps and spikes on them were used to keep witches away, so their spells couldn't affect their captures. Liar, liar, pants on fire. Shame masks were intended to silence wagging tongues and offensive behavior. Unfortunately, it was used on women who spoke their minds to their husbands instead of being subservient like the Bible demanded, or on women accused of being witches or gossips. The masks were usually fashioned of iron, with features that often displayed the wearer's offense, like big ears and a long tongue for accusations of being nosy and gossipy, or bells to warn the public that a scold was approaching. You could have been a bad musician and had to wear a collar with a built-in flute. Once warned, the public often took part in beating and humiliating the wearer. A person convicted of public intoxication was made to wear the drunkard's cloak, a barrel with holes cut out for the head and arms. The accused was made to walk around town in an attempt to sober them up and face public humiliation. Naked prisoners were seated on the iron chair in such a position that at the slightest movement, hundreds of sharp spikes would stick in their skin. The rack was a wooden platform with rollers at both ends. The victim's hands and feet were tied to each end, and the rollers would be turned, stretching the victim's body to uncomfortable lengths. The wheel was used to torture and kill prisoners for public executions. The victim would be left on the wheel to die or could be placed on top of a tall pole so birds could feed on their flesh while they were still alive. The Iron Maiden had double doors on it to place the victim inside. One door had 8 spikes on it, the other 13 spikes. The spikes were strategically placed to pierce several organs so the victim would bleed to death. While shaming and torture were common forms of punishment during medieval times, you could escape any of those if you made friends with the night watchman and had something he wanted in exchange. He would escort you to the back gate, open the door, and let you escape to freedom. The last thing you would see was the tower behind you as you made your way out of the city.
There is a special place on West Continental Road, and just past the point where the houses end, you will find it. Welcome to the Community Performance and Arts Center, or as many have affectionately come to call the venue, CPAC. What is CPAC? It is a focal point for the arts that has become an important part of the active lives of those living in Green Valley and surrounding areas. In the early 1990s, area residents realized that a local performing arts center was an important priority for their growing community. Following a massive grassroots effort, support from local businesses, and the Pima County government, the CPAC Foundation was incorporated in 1999. A countywide bond issue was approved in 2004, and the project was completed in 2009. This aesthetically beautiful center was designed by world-renowned architect Antoine Prédoc. Leased and operated by the CPAC Foundation, it includes a 203-seat theater, an art gallery, a set design shop, and a generous multi-purpose space. All of this is managed by the CPAC staff of 5 employees and enlists the services of over 200 dedicated and trained volunteers. Today, our center continues to improve quality of life for area residents through the power of the arts, and more than 50,000 people patronize CPAC on an annual basis. CPAC hosts more than 150 performances during a typical year, covering multiple genres and performed both by touring artists and local talent. The center houses monthly visual art exhibits showcasing both area and regional artists, and offers a variety of classes in visual art, music, theater, and dance. In addition to its active programming, CPAC also rents facilities for various community events. The facility is home to almost a dozen organizations, including 5 bands, 2 choirs, a monthly community talent show called Green Valley's Got Talent, and weekly church services, in addition to parties, meetings, and other social gatherings. CPAC is also proud to serve as the home for its own resident theater company, the Santa Cruz Shoestring Players, a volunteer theater organization open to people of all ages. Since 2008, Shoestring has provided a training ground for young actors and theater veterans across the state, and has presented dozens of productions, including works by many well-known playwrights. CPAC is especially proud of our annual Youth Summer Arts Camp, where students in elementary school through high school produce a full-scale musical, complete with acting, costumes, makeup, choreography, sound, lights, and set design. The center has provided multiple school-time matinee performances where children are bused to the CPAC Theater. For many of these students, it is the first time they have ever attended a performance or even seen the inside of a theater. The center also provides various complimentary performances at selected local school sites. Through another program entitled Culture Pass, hundreds of complimentary tickets are issued to the greater community through the local library. It goes without saying that all of these services require adequate funding in order to materialize. Many patrons are surprised to learn that the cost of a ticket or class covers less than half of the actual expense. As a 501c3 nonprofit arts organization, CPAC is the beneficiary of grants, funding from local businesses, numerous endowment and legacy gifts, and receives the support of more than 500 annual donors. CPAC seeks to continually improve upon the past with various capital campaigns, including the replacement of theater seats and other important additions that increase the comfort, sound, accessibility, safety, and improvement of the overall patron experience. John F. Kennedy once said, "The life of the arts is close to the center of a nation's purpose and is a test to the quality of a nation's civilization." The Community Performance and Art Center is grateful for the community's loyal support over the past decade, and we look forward to helping you discover the magic of the arts at CPAC for years to come.
When General William Jackson Palmer came to the West after the Civil War, he must have been amazed by the grandeur of the Rocky Mountains. Arriving in Denver in 1870, he envisioned a rail line heading south through Santa Fe, New Mexico, to El Paso, and even running all the way to Mexico City. Palmer was building a narrow gauge through the Rockies. General Palmer won the Congressional Medal of Honor for his service in the Civil War. But at heart, he was a railroad man. He had a vision that could only be satisfied by a narrow-gauge rail system. Instead of the standard track gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches, which had been dictated by Abraham Lincoln himself, most of Palmer's original line used 3-foot gauge track. What is left of the Denver and Rio Grande line today still measures 3 feet between the rails. The narrow gauge and lightweight track was easier to engineer in the narrow spaces and steep mountain passes through which the line had to pass. A map from the era details the extent of the Denver and Rio Grande. The red line was standard gauge track in the northern part of the empire, but the black represents the spider's web of narrow gauge track in southern Colorado and northern New Mexico, which was the backbone of his little railroad. The primary purpose of the line was to serve the mining industry. In the last half of the 19th century, men were digging in these hills for that shiny silver metal which would spell a fortune for a very few fortunate people. The railroads would haul out the ore and bring in much-needed supplies. One of the last lines to be completed connected Durango with the mining town of Silverton. It was the most difficult stretch of track laid by the little company. Even though it was only 45 miles long, they had to navigate a very narrow gorge along the Animas River. The Silverton branch has 32 bridges and was the first part of the Denver and Rio Grande to use steel rather than iron track. The new rail was very light, at only 30 pounds per yard. Today, all that's left of the Denver and Rio Grande spider web is 2 lines. The Silverton branch, which is now called the Durango and Silverton narrow gauge, and the Cumbres and Toltec, which winds between the states of Colorado and New Mexico. The lines no longer haul silver ore or even supplies. They both haul tourists. But the passengers get their money's worth. The end of the line for the Durango and Silverton is in the mountain mining town of Silverton. Things took off here in 1870 when full-scale silver and gold mining got underway, with dozens of shafts being bored into these mountains. The town grew up even before the railroad arrived, but everyone had to be supplied on the backs of horses and mules. With the arrival of the little narrow gauge rail line in 1882, pack trains were no longer needed and mining boomed here for the next 30 years. Some miners even hung on until the last mine closed in 1991. Today, all the mines are closed and the town depends on tourists, many of whom arrive by train. One of the town's landmarks is the San Juan County Courthouse. It's made of brick and features a gold-colored dome and a clock tower. It was completed in 1907. Silverton is 9,300 feet above sea level. It's one of the highest towns in the world. Today, a Y is used to turn the tourist trains around for the return trip to Durango. Passengers get to see the scenery in reverse. Engine number 481 is in service today. It was originally built for the Denver, Rio Grande, and Western in 1925 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia. Like all the locomotives on the line, 481 is fueled by coal. 481 operated until the 1960s and then was taken out of service for about 20 years. After considerable restoration work, it ended back in service on the Durango and Silverton in 1981 and has been in service here ever since. The Durango and Silverton today is also used by mountain hikers and backpackers. Its freight cars haul camping gear and packs up into the high country. The little rail line is a convenient and fast way for high mountain adventurers to get above 9,000 feet very quickly. In the 1950s, Hollywood discovered this high mountain rail line. The first film shot here was Ticket to Tomahawk in 1950, which starred Dan Daly and Ann Baxter.
In 1843, 'twas then I met sweet Betty McGee, an elegant girl she seemed to be while working on the railroad. An elegant girl she seemed to be while working on the railroad.
And oh yes, it had a newcomer. Her name was Marilyn Monroe. But the real star of the film was the Durango and Silverton narrow gauge. As a matter of fact, the distinctive orange-colored rolling stock was dictated by the scenic designer from 20th Century Fox. The railroad apparently liked the color and decided to keep it. Today, all of the line's passenger cars are painted in that distinctive orange color. The engine in the film Ticket to Tomahawk was old number 20, which had originally run on the Rio Grande Southern. In the film, it's called engine number 1, the Emma Sweeney. It now sits in the Colorado Rail Museum. At least 30 feature movies and many more television shows have used the line as a backdrop. After all, how many steam engines chugging through mountains, canyons, and forests can you find in the West today?
Dynamite's ready, Butch.
Well, that ought to do it.
Think you used enough dynamite there, Butch?
Even parts of the 1968 film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were filmed on the line.
What is the delay? Indians, but they're peaceful Indians.
In 1956, Michael Todd's Around the World in 80 Days filmed a sequence on the Durango and Silverton. The director wanted a tunnel scene, but the road didn't have any tunnels. So the Hollywood set builders constructed one around a small portion of the line. It was made of paper mache and chicken wire. The little narrow gauge line has survived world wars, mountain snowslides, recessions, and worst of all, changing times. Today, the Durango and Silverton is privately owned and operated and receives no government funding. Gone is the revenue from the mines, so tourists are now the cargo hauled up and down the canyons along the Animas River. From the time passengers get on in Durango and travel through the mountains until they get off in Silverton, they are literally living in a different time. They get a view of what it was like for people in the 1880s to rattle and bump their way through the mountains and forests of Colorado's high country. Another part of the original narrow gauge Denver and Rio Grande that exists today winds between the states of Colorado and New Mexico. Renamed the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad, this 64-mile line between Chama, New Mexico and Antonito, Colorado, is no longer connected to any other part of the old rail system, but it is the longest and highest steam railroad in the United States. Everywhere you turn on the railroad, there are classic postcard pictures that take the viewer back to another time. On today's run is engine number 488. It's a Mikado Type 282 steam locomotive built by Baldwin and delivered to the Denver and Rio Grande Western in 1925. The Western was added to the line's name after a merger in 1920. With a weight of almost 85 tons and operating on 3-foot track, number 488 easily negotiates the steep curves and high mountain passes. In a valley beyond the Cumbres Pass, a huge loop was constructed that allowed trains in a bygone era to stop near some livestock pens in order to load cattle and sheep for market. The pens are long gone, but a few houses dot the valley. The loop gives passengers a very scenic ride. They also pass a water tower that was apparently never used by the railroad, but was built here in 1970 for a movie. Another site in the Cumbres and Toltec line is the famous Galloping Goose No. 5. These hybrids, originally built in the 1930s by the Rio Grande Southern, were the original Transformers. They were a combination truck and school bus turned into a powered train car. The original cars were built around a 1931 Master 6 Buick four-door sedan. They were put into service in order to stave off bankruptcy, because they were much cheaper to operate for passenger service than the much larger steam trains that served the Rocky Mountains. Many of them were in regular service until 1950. Today, No. 5 is operated from time to time on the Cumbres and Toltec line, giving tourists a slightly different view of the Rockies. As the West changed, so did the modes of transportation. Airplanes, trucks, and cars would change the way things were moved around the vast spaces of the West. As mines closed and ranchers and loggers switched to big trucks, the little mountain railroads went into decline. A few preservationists have been able to hang on to small parts of our railroad past. They have repaired, patched, and retooled engines and rolling stock that will soon have been in service for over 100 years. These engines will not last forever, but at least for a while, they're ours to enjoy.